About 10 years ago, my friend Brendan Scott, you remember him? We had him on talking about sports
Yes,
stories.
that was an awesome episode.
Yeah. It was about 10 years ago. He got really interested in this book called A Million Miles in a Thousand Years by Donald Miller. Have you read it?
No, I haven't, but it sounds interesting.
Well, Brendan harassed me into reading it. And Donald Miller was the author of the memoir Blue Like Jazz. Did you read that?
Nope, didn't get that one either. I'm putting stars next to these books.
Okay, well, it became a mega seller probably 15, 18 years ago. And a couple of filmmakers decided to turn his memoir, Blue Like Jazz, into a movie. And the whole experience of seeing his life turned into a drama compelled Don Miller to write this book, A Million Miles in a Thousand Years. And it's a book about seeing your life as a story and then shaping the narrative in the way that you want.
Well, that sounds like a trend that's occurring over the last decade or so because people are talking about telling your personal story in the context of business and therapy, building your online platform. That's a new trend, a macro trend word, platform, and even engaging with friends and families and seeing our lives as personal narrative. It's a big deal.
Yeah. Well, as we were thinking about this episode, which is kind of a different episode for us.
Yeah.
It's a very different kind of episode for us. I went back and pulled some things out of A Million Miles in a Thousand Years. The first one is this. This is a quote from the book. If you watched a movie about a guy who wanted a Volvo and worked for years to get it, you wouldn't cry at the end when he drove off the lot testing the windshield wipers. You wouldn't tell your friends you saw a beautiful movie or go home and put a record on to think about the story you'd seen. The truth is, you wouldn't remember that movie a week later except to feel you've been robbed and want your money back. Nobody cries at the end of a movie about a guy who wants a Volvo. But we spend years actually living those stories and expect our lives to be meaningful. The truth is, what we choose to do with our lives won't make a story meaningful. It won't make a life meaningful either.
Wow, that is very, very true. It makes me think of some of the meaningful stories that are being shared right now, especially some of those women who were the code breakers in World War II, the Bletchley women, the mathematicians who worked at NASA, who are starting to be recognized now, and to talk about how to tell your life story in a way that makes it meaningful for yourself and others. Because while you may think your life story is really interesting, if you don't tell it in a meaningful way, it may be like the Volvo.
Right.
And so you've got to maybe have that understanding. Well, today we're going to be talking with Oleg Lougheed.
Hi, I'm Holland Webb.
Hi, I'm Amy Bolin.
And you're listening to The Afterword, a conversation about the future of words.
Oleg is a TEDx speaker. He is the host of 2 podcasts and the executive director of Overcoming Odds through storytelling and shared experiences. Overcoming Odds restores a sense of belonging and family, raises awareness within the adoption and foster care community, and provides resources for future adoptive parents. So, Oleg, welcome to the Afterword table. Tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this platform to begin with. It's very interesting that, Holland, you actually bring up that book. I was recently having a conversation and a lunch with a friend of mine, and one of the books he recommended was actually that same exact book. So I think there's something that I have to add on to my list of things to do, and that is to purchase that book because I've heard it twice, literally the second day in a row. So I think there is a reason for why that's happening. For me, when we talk about this story and this narrative that each and every one of us has and carries forward with what we do within our daily lives. My story began in a relatively small town in Russia called Chubarkul. That was my place of origin. That was the place where I was born and had the opportunity to live under one roof with my mom and my sister until I was about 3 to 4 years old. And one of the things that ended up happening at that particular age was my mom, when I was 3 to 4 years old, ended up becoming an alcoholic. And for those who are listening that might be able to relate, when that happens, your whole family dynamic actually changes. What I mean by that was when my mom chose to become an alcoholic, my sister actually ended up becoming my legal guardian. But there was something, and I think there's something for all of us when we're children, and that is even in moments of separation where our families split apart, whether it's due to divorce or my particular case, where my mom was choosing to take a different path and my sister not choosing to accept her, there's something within the child that really wants to preserve that family setting. And so I don't think for me that story was any different. And the reason why I say that is because from the ages of 3 to 4 until when I was 9, when I officially chose to relinquish my parents' rights and go into an orphanage, that is exactly what I tried to do. I felt like I was that rock between two islands. I tried to bring back my family all under one roof again and experience that feeling of love and caring and everything else that a family resembles in the child's eyes. Fast forward to when I was 9 years old, I decided to take a slightly different path in life. And the reason why was because I had faced so many different adversities and tragedies prior to it that I just had a moment where I felt that enough was enough. Now, I don't think I fully recognized the consequences of that particular decision. All I knew was that by choosing to give up my parents' rights and go into an orphanage, that I would possibly putting myself in a situation where I would be faced with a slightly different circumstance than the one that I was born into. After living there for 3 years, I'll tell you this, that everything you hear about the orphanage system, especially in Europe, as far as the different cases of abuse, mental, physical, and everything else that happens in between, it's all true. It all happened during my time living there. But I'll tell you this, as much as I wanted to be someone who chose to look at that particular instance and place as a negative experience, I'm extremely grateful. I'm grateful for the fact that I was part of that particular system, because it is through that particular system that I was able to be adopted by a family from Ann Arbor, Michigan when I was 12. Now, fast forward to being a 12-year-old kid and coming to the United States. This was 2005. My understanding of the United States was that it was a place of opportunity, or otherwise known as dreamland. I have no idea what that means. I still don't understand it. But I just somehow sensed that this was going to be the spot. This was going to be the place where I could possibly get a second chance at life and build a life that I didn't even imagine was possible. So for any of those that are listening to this particular segment and have experienced similar challenges of coming to a country and not being able to speak the language, not being able to understand the culture, struggling to form family relationships, I just want you to know you're not alone. You truly aren't. I've been there. I've lived through every single one of those moments. I can still pinpoint in the times when I stood in front of my parents and we yelled at each other to a point where both of us stood there crying because we simply didn't understand how to communicate with each other. So I think when we talk about our stories and we talk about the obstacles and the challenges that each and every one of us faces in life, what I choose to look at is really the takeaways and the lessons within each one. Because I think we can look at all those hardships and we can let them consume us to a degree where they don't give us the opportunity to look at it from any other way. And I think the best thing that I can do when it comes to a challenge is really try and ask myself the question of, what am I supposed to learn from this? So what that I'm going through a financial struggle? So what that I had difficulties when it came to forming a relationship with my parents? So what that I didn't know English when I first came to this country? It's all of the events that make up who I am today. It's not only the good aspects, but it's the good, the bad, and everything in between. And so I really appreciate you guys having me on this platform and giving me this opportunity to briefly share who I am. And the reason why I choose to share this particular story is to show people not only where I was, but also where I'm going with it and what I'm choosing to do with that particular story to help other people recognize the worth and the value of their own unique individual paths in life.
Wow. Well, that's amazing, Oleg. Thank you. And, one of the things that I'm hearing you share is that there's some parts of your story that maybe were the inciting incident. All well-told stories have that. When you watch the movie, it's about 15 minutes into the movie. It's that moment when the character's ordinary world suddenly gets broken away in a big way. You've mentioned several already, I think might be inciting incidents, but what would you say is the inciting incident in your personal story?
That's a really fascinating question. I would say for me, there were a couple, and I think the reason why I choose to answer it in that way is because, so when I was 9 and I had made that decision to give up my parents' rights and go into the orphanage and thinking that that was going to be a better place, and then compared that to the time when I was 12, when I ultimately said goodbye to my birth family and choose the new adoptive family as my set of parents. Those are two very different circumstances. But yet what was interesting was that in both of those cases, I was able to put myself in a position where I could experience the other part of this world or another part of life. So I think that once we talk about the different stories and we talk about the life of each story, what I find fascinating is that there's always a story within a story. There's always a world within a world. And so for me, I think those were two very pivotal points, especially the one of being adopted and coming here. And the reason why is because my world did change. I mean, there were a lot of challenges and struggles at the beginning, but when you look at any character, any person who has lived a life, when have there not been struggles? Right? I think struggles are all part of the journey. I think struggles, that's what makes it interesting. I'm a huge believer that at the end of the day, people just want to understand people. And what fascinates us the most, after having worked with so many different groups and so many different individuals, is learning about the other individual's story, but also learning about the fact of how did they overcome what I'm experiencing or what I experienced a week ago.
Yeah, excellent.
And that's the thing that I think we all crave answers to, right? That's the thing that makes it fascinating. I mean, when we read books or watch movies, I'll speak from my point of view. That's what really fascinates me. Like, how is this person going to make it through this? And even though in the back of your mind, especially when it comes to movies and certain books, you can sense that there's a quote-unquote happy ending. Mm-hmm. And to a degree, I think that also is true in life. I think at the end, it always works out somehow. I truly believe that. You know, no matter what it is that you're going through at the moment, it's going to work out. It may not work out in the same exact shape and form that you envision it right now, but I think if you continue to keep pushing and keep on finding a way and putting yourself out there, there's going to be that breakthrough moment where someone else or something else comes into your life and helps you see it from a different view.
Excellent. Thank you. That's very good.
Yeah, for sure. You know, this is kind of a different topic for us because we usually talk about some major trend in the world and then how storytelling intersects with that. So we've talked about everything from video games to dementia to actually, we did an episode on foster care and adoption not that long ago.
And border crossing stories where Oleg had some border crossing situations that were similar to what Matali Perkins was sharing.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. But this is a little bit different for us, thinking about how to frame your personal story sort of in the world where all these other things are happening around us. I'm going to go back to the book, A Million Miles in 1,000 Years, and throw out something else here. Once you live a good story, you get a taste for a kind of meaning in life, and you can't go back to being normal. You can't go back to meaningless scenes stitched together by the forgettable thread of wasted time. That's from A Million Miles in 1,000 Years. Now, how do you leverage the events of your life so they are no longer meaningless scenes, but are now something that's structured and something that's meaningful?
Well, see, that's a really interesting question. And the reason why I say that is because of this. For the longest time, when I thought of purpose, I used to think that in order for me to find purpose, I have to go travel to the other part of the world. I got to go to Thailand. I have to go backpacking. I have to do something that hasn't either been done before or something that I haven't done before. But what I've learned over time was that I think purpose, you get to define it, and then throughout life, you get to refine it. What I mean by that is that when we talk about this sense of purpose and this sense of identity and this concept that we have to go out there and acquire more experiences in order to find that ultimate thing that we're genuinely passionate about. I don't think that's entirely true. And I think the reason why is because each and every one of us already has the experiences that we can make purposeful, right? We already have all of these different events within our lives that we can choose to look at from a different lens. So when I think about your initial question, as far as how do you make them meaningful, how do you make them purposeful, I think it really does just boil down to simply asking yourself the question of how can I make this particular event meaningful or purposeful, or what is important to me about it? You know, what are the emotions that are being triggered as I think about it? What are the moments of gratitude? Who are the people that are involved within it that are helping me as part of it all? And that's really what helped me align with what I started to do and the person that I try to become, is really create that space and understanding that you already have everything within you and you are already enough, regardless of where you are. Now, don't get me wrong. Not everyone traveled the same path that I have, right? So people might be able to say, well, you have gone through a very severe set of challenges and adversities when you were younger. But that doesn't mean that's the only purpose that's available. Each and every one of us, I firmly believe, has their own purpose, has their own meaning, because we're all following different paths. The path that you take in creating whoever it is that you envision in becoming, without a doubt, is going to be different compared to the path that I take.
Sure. But let me ask you this, Oleg. I get it that, you know, purpose can be defined and refined, and we have all those things in it. And that sounds really good. But I'm going to play devil's advocate for a minute because, you know, let's say we have had that story and maybe I'm not sure I can leverage this story. I'm not sure that it's enough. And so I guess where I want to see from you, from my teacher mind, says, how then do you help people leverage this story so that they aren't meaningless scenes, but there is something meaningful? Because I'm not sure everybody is already in that mindset. So what would you say to that person that has all these isolated scenes, doesn't necessarily feel like their purpose is defined, but needs to maybe have that understanding of how to leverage that story? What would you say to that person?
Well, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is that not everyone has to have the same influence and the level of impact as Oprah. I think that's the first point of understanding, is that I think oftentimes we have put this word impact and purpose almost on a pedestal, and it becomes something that is very unattainable to achieve. I mean, I used to catch myself in similar situations. I have lived that part of my story where I felt that parts of my story were not worthy of sharing. And the reason why is because I felt that it wouldn't have as great of an impact, because I thought that the only level of impact that was acceptable was the one of Oprah or Tony Robbins or anyone else who has achieved such a high influence in today's day and age. But I think it really comes down to identifying and redefining, what is your world? What is the impact that you want to have? You know, I think oftentimes we think about impact and we think about having to impact the whole world, and if we don't, then somehow we failed. But the thing is, your world, it's not necessarily the entire 7 or however many billion people there are on this planet. Your world could literally mean the people that you surround yourself with, your neighbors, the people that you go to school with. That is your world. And so I think helping people understand that they can have an impact and that their story matters is understanding that they have the ability to change and impact their own world. It's not about impacting all the people on this planet. It's just about impacting those that are within your particular circle. So I think the question that I would ask is, who's within your world? And then beyond that, really trying to identify which elements of your story do you want to pursue. I didn't wake up like this. This took me years to develop and understand and process.
Right.
And there are many layers to it. You know, right now it
think,
sounds like all one cohesive narrative, but there were times where all I could talk about was just elements of forgiveness, and people had to forgive, or acceptance, or embracing, or believing.
Right. And that's my point, because, you know, I think sometimes when people hear a story like yours, Oleg, and it sounds like it's all cohesive and all the meaningless scenes have now come together, they're like, there's no way, you know, there's just no way. It's just too overwhelming. And plus, I don't see the impact right now. And so I that's kind of where I was pushing you a little bit, because I think it is important for people to understand that this is a process. That when we choose to leverage our story and use our story, it's not instantaneous. It does take time to look at it and understand what is being defined and refined in that process. So I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you.
It's interesting. I was listening to a talk just before I came over here, actually, about purpose. And the speaker was talking about how, like you said, we put these ideas of purpose or mission or calling, and we so elevate them that people feel like they can never find out what that is, or they spend so long searching for it that we miss all the opportunities to actually live out a purpose and a mission and a calling in sort of the small scenes of our lives, because we keep looking for something that's bigger and something that's basically not here and not now.
Right. Right. It's the bloom where you're planted thing. Awesome.
Yeah. And, you know, the biggest thing that I've learned along this journey that has really helped me tremendously is when I was first choosing to start this particular organization of Overcoming Odds, I had received a lot of different feedback and advice as far as how to start something like this. And typically the advice that I received was that when you start a business, one of the very first things that you have to do is you have to go out there and find that first source of revenue. I chose to go a completely different route. I said that instead of going out there and choosing to look for that first source of revenue, I am going to become the client of this business. And the reason why I chose that is because I really wanted to understand, what is it that I'm trying to solve? I think the most important thing that we can do, not even as far as business owners, but anyone that really just embarks on this journey, is really trying to understand, why did you start this to begin with? What is it solving for you, right? We create a lot of these platforms, as both of you have mentioned prior to the show. People oftentimes create businesses and they try and associate these narratives and these stories with it. The danger becomes this. I think if you build a business, or if you build any other platform based on someone else's assumptions and perspectives, and you don't really relate it to who you are, what's going to happen if their perspectives change tomorrow? You're going to be required to change your business, right? So I think really digging deep and understanding, why did you start this? What is this solving for you? And that's what I was saying when we talk about impact and influence, and you guys are right. It does become so unattainable because it is so elevated. There's such a high standard for what it needs to be. But not everyone has to be there. You can impact one other person. You can impact yourself. And as long as you're documenting and I think being transparent and showing the progress and the journey, other people will begin to notice. And simultaneously, what you're also doing is not only do you give yourself permission to enter that space of growth, but you're also giving permission to other people who are looking to jump into the same space that you are currently in.
Absolutely. That's excellent. You know, and again, you know, when I think about anyone who is moving in that direction and knowing your why, I think that's critical, whether it's in business or wherever it may be, because at this point with your business, and we'll talk about that also in a minute, because I'd love for you to share more about Overcoming Odds and what you do speaking to others at college campuses. That's an important thing, is to know your why. Because otherwise, it's very difficult to either run a business successfully, or especially with a TEDx speaker like you, to even have that platform. So knowing that why is important. So tell us a little bit about Overcoming Odds.
I think the biggest reason for knowing your why is this. As someone who has been in business for about 3 years now, there becomes a point, in fact, there become multiple points where you're faced with a very difficult question. And I think it's the ultimate question that most of us as business owners face. And that is, do I choose to stay in business, or do I put myself out of business? And I think the only way you can answer that particular question is understanding why did you start this to begin with.
Right.
So for me, how I started this particular organization was that about 3 years ago, I was faced with a similar set of questions that I think a lot of us are. And that is, I began to look back at my experience, and I started to ask myself the question of why me? Why was I the one that was put through this journey? And why was I the one that was meant to go through the different challenges that I have? And for the longest time, I used to think that that answer would have to come in this dramatic fashion, like any of the Batman movies, you know, where the world ends and you wake up and it's like you have this enlightened moment where you finally figure it out. Well, little did I know that that doesn't actually happen like that. And what I've realized was that instead of chasing or looking for that one particular moment that was going to reveal me that why or that purpose, I began to embrace my journey for what it was. And during that time, I realized something that I didn't know before. And it was, if not you, then who else? If it wasn't you that was meant to experience the life that you have, who else was going to do it? It's not like I can go out on the street and say, hey, I'm done dealing with this. This is yours from here. You know, you're going to have to process all these challenges, all these traumatic experiences. It's something that's a part of you, and it's something that's a part of you forever. So 3 years ago, I chose to own it, and I chose to step forward with it and develop the courage and create a space for other people to be able to share and embrace their own individual stories. And what I've learned was that this particular space served as a form of narrative therapy and positive psychology for a lot of people, because it helped them see that their past does not have to define their present and their future. That there's another way they can think about their experiences. There is another story that they can tell around the traumatic experiences that they had within their lives. And so from there, I became very interested in understanding not only why people chose to think that way, but what are some of the things that they were trying to reshape as far as the different events that they had within their lives. And that's where I just started to follow kind of the natural progression of it and just allow the community to essentially build this platform, to be completely honest with you. Every single event, every single podcast episode, everything that we've done has been somehow related to a person sharing their story through our initial campaign, which was called Stand Up and Speak Up. And then all the themes and everything, it just comes out naturally. And I think the reason why is because we're very good at creating spaces for people just to be people. Like, to give you an example, when we host podcast episodes, I'm typically the one that interviews people on the show. About 30 or 40 episodes into starting that particular platform, we followed the traditional route as far as having sample questions and different things to kind of continue the conversation and dialogue. And then at episode 40, I decided to make, it was 40 or 50, I decided to make a change to the structure. And I abandoned the sample questions completely, and I only posed one question to the person that's being interviewed prior to the show. And I said, what is a question that you are currently seeking an answer to in life? And I'll tell you this, after posing that question, it changed the conversation completely. Because it gave an opportunity for that person to process a part of their story that they've been trying to voice for many, many years.
Wow, that's fascinating. So, Oleg, it sounds like in this process of overcoming odds and this, your podcast that you do, you've given people a voice You give them space to own their story, embrace that individual narrative, and give them a platform in which to see that their purpose can be defined and refined. And I think that's pretty powerful. I appreciate you sharing that information.
Yeah, this was a great conversation, but we are going to draw the line on this episode right here. So we have more stuff to talk about next week. And join us next week as we continue to talk with TEDx speaker, entrepreneur, and podcast host Oleg Lougheed about how to tell and leverage your personal story. While you wait, please leave us a review, rate us on iTunes, and become a subscriber to the afterwordpodcast.com. It does help us keep the conversations going. And as always, remember, you are welcome at our table.